Esto es Warp Talks, el podcast de Warp, en el que creamos un espacio de diálogo vivo con los nombres que marcan el ritmo en las diferentes industrias creativas alrededor del mundo.
Hi, Natalie, how are you?
Doing great. Hi, how are you?
Fine, thanks. It's okay if I call you Natalie?
Oh, yeah. No, call me Weyes Blood. Okay.
That will be awesome too. The first thing I would like to know, from your perspective as a person and as an artist, what is your perception of the world after the whole pandemic situation?
Yeah, I felt like the pandemic really was kind of like gasoline being poured on a pre-existing fire, and that fire was kind of like the way that the smartphones are kind of disintegrating the social fabric, and how in a lot of ways there's like this energy of kind of isolation and kind of false artificial interconnectivity when people are actually feeling, strangely less connected and kind of more anxious and depressed. And yeah, I think in general, there's kind of been a trend of people kind of being confused about the future and the uncertainty of it all. And for me, I just learned that it's important to have these conversations and kind of talk about the nuances, because I think things change faster than we can even fully keep up with, especially because the algorithms are so smart and excellent that, it's easy to think, oh, it's just a matter of this, or it's just a matter of this, but it's actually like a pretty long conversation to even figure out what's going on, because we can't really go back in time. We can't get rid of the phones. We can't get rid of social media. Everybody is still completely dependent on fossil fuels. And all these things need to be kind of talked about in a more nuanced way, because we haven't really figured out how to evolve past the kind of negative aspects of them,
Following with that topic, in the letter you wrote about your new album, you commented of the meaning of seeking freedom away from the algorithms and loops that control our daily lives. What is your strategy or method to seek that freedom?
I think my hope is just that people would understand that's, a part of our reality now. And I mean, in some ways, there might be like spiritual algorithms, like there's like deeper patterns everywhere. But the truth is the algorithm on our phone is like, slightly parasitic. And so it's like you kind of, I think, should feel comfortable knowing when media and everything is kind of catered towards your morbid curiosities, that it's important to kind of keep that in check and kind of think of fate as the ultimate algorithm. Like if you go out and just randomly run into somebody or randomly find something, that is like a beautiful thing just as much as, whatever's on your phone.
After all, these social phenomena have influenced the development of a trilogy of records that you have been talking about lately, and that began with the Titanic Rising and his second part with In Darkness Hearts Aglow. And I would like to know, what is the main connection between all of these albums, knowing that the third one is still to come?
I think the first one is kind of like sounding the alarm and observing everything that's happening and kind of like, maybe it's okay, but this is crazy. And the second one is like living amidst the sound of the blare of the alarm and kind of going more subterranean and internal and talking about intimacy and how intimacy is impacted by all these big kind of huge, overarching structural changes in our society. And I think the third one is going to be about, kind of the future and the hope, kind of like how would you deal with that in a way that makes life more livable and less, based in fear.
What are the main difference In Darkness Hearts Aglow sessions feel compared to Titanic Rising?
Well, at first people were kind of masked up. So that was really weird, being in the studio with masks and worrying about vaccination and kind of like, are we going to get to just take off our masks? And then once we did, it was like, woo. But yeah, I think technically it was definitely the energy was different. Everybody coming off the pandemic was not bouncing off the walls per se. Like everybody was kind of like crawling out of their shell and being like, oh, that was weird, especially for musicians. So I think the energy took a while to get going. And then once it did, it's like we recorded so much and we were kind of going all crazy because we really missed it.
How did you realize that this second album was finished?
When I think it took a while, but I kind of hit a point where I was losing my mind and I was like, okay, it's done. You know, like I can't keep tweaking and adding things forever. I kind of had a feeling, I was like, all right, I've kind of reached that point of like max insanity. And that's usually when I know it's done.
Have you always known that both Titanic Rising and In Darkness Hearts Aglow will belong to a trilogy?
I think when I was writing this one, because my album cycle for Titanic Rising got cut really short, there was still a year more of touring and stuff happening. And so I was like, oh my God, I always felt like after Titanic Rising, I would make a very big departure record and kind of have it be this really upbeat, like completely different thing. But when I sat down to write, it wasn't, what was coming out was a continuation of the last record. And I was like, oh, this is actually like, this is the middle point, and the next record is going to be the crazy departure record.
Another thing that I noticed that connects both albums is how narrative and clear they are to build images. Was there any artistic work, I don't know, maybe a record, a song, movie, or a book that inspired you the way to make these two albums?
Yeah, you know, I got really into Paul Schrader, who's a filmmaker who he was buddies with Martin Scorsese. He like wrote Taxi Driver, but he was raised really Calvinist. So I feel like his stuff deals with a lot of kind of, you know, purity versus violence, you know, like love versus violence. And like he's kind of juxtaposes these really strong themes that are kind of like incompatible, but shows how they're all a part of life. And yeah, I was thinking about that a lot. Like it's a really sad time, but if I sing about it really beautifully, then it kind of transcends that pain. And yeah, there was definitely, you know, imagery and kind of Sacred Heart paintings that kind of stuck out to me, but also like science fiction and kind of this idea that if your heart was a glow stick, if you break it and it gets cracked, then it'll glow more. And I thought that was really funny and inspiring. But yeah, it's a confluence of weird stuff. And I really liked this book, The Culture of Narcissism by Charles Losh. I really loved the poet Wendell Berry. And yeah, Society of the Spectacle I read, which was terrifying. There was a lot of stuff that fed into it.
My favorite song on the album was Hearts Aglow, and also I think it's one of the greatest songs of 2022 because it feels so epic in nature as those tracks of the 60s and the 70s that started as a ballades and ended with guitar solos and explosive drums. Could you tell me more about that song?
Yeah, Hearts Aglow. Well, yeah, it's like the centerpiece of the album. It's the title track. It's kind of about falling in love in a time where everything is so insane that it's like you kind of can't go back to the childlike innocence of you know what we thought the future was going to be like, but you still can pretend you can. And I do think that, you know, it is kind of terrifying when you start having the feels for somebody, whether or not it's a good idea or not. Is something you can't totally control. So yeah, it's kind of a love song, like kind of falling in love in a time of uncertainty. Yeah, and I wanted it to feel very nostalgic, you know, Ferris wheels, carnivals, all that good stuff.
Like falling in love in the end of the world, no?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Also, I would like to talk about the covers of the both albums, because in Titanic Rising we see this almost apocalyptic image of a room sunk in the water, and in Darkness Hearts Aglow there is your portrait between light and darkness, and it feels so beautiful. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I felt like one of the things that gets so overwhelming about how dark this time is, it's like it's really hard to focus in on where the light might be, and everything just feels kind of oppressively weird. And it's like the one thing that does shine through is like the uniqueness of every human soul. And if there's some light there, then like focusing in on it yeah, I think is a very beautiful thing. This idea that we can guide each other through the dark process with our own light. And that, you know, no matter how processed or algorithmic or like, you know, capitalistic everything has become in terms of commodifying people and kind of making people have to hustle and sell themselves, I think the human soul kind of remains, you know, unchanged. And I think that's kind of what the light symbolizes.
With all this that we have talked about, algorithms and capitalism, I would like to bring it to the field of the music industry. Voy con segunda. With all this conversation about algorithms and economic system, I would like to bring to the table the topic of the music industry. A few weeks ago, I read a conversation between Lord and David Byrne in which they say that they are a little tired of this moment in the industry because music is about everything but music. It's about statics, it's about marketing, it's about social media. And that means that artists have less and less time to compose and record. What is your opinion about that?
I think it's weird. Yeah, it's like very hard to quantify an artist's success because you could be very viral on TikTok and have this big moment, but you can't like sell tickets to your show. Or you can have this great touring audience and you sell like a lot of tickets, but your streams are weird. You know, it's just like the fact that anybody is looking at these stats, it doesn't actually say that much. So in some ways, it's kind of a great mystery what's really going on. And I think the people that flip out are like the industry people because they can't really figure it out. And it is rough on the musicians to have to constantly shift gears and constantly kind of ride the wave of whatever's happening. But I feel like music has always been kind of this extremely flawed thing to commodify because it is ultimately like so ephemeral. So it's not like institutionalized. There's no unions. It's really just the Wild West. And I think that creates more uncertainty and destabilization. And unfortunately, it hasn't been about good art in quite some time. I think there was a time where music was very radical and it was about being kind of revolutionary and good, but I think they found out probably in the middle 90s that you could make a lot more money doing something else. And I think alternative stuff is becoming more popular now because people were kind of starved for authenticity. But it's like instead of alternative artists kind of breaking into the mainstream, it's more like they just have gigantic careers and the radio doesn't play them, while big pop stars now are trying to seem more alternative by making weird records and stuff. But yeah, I just think it's all mixed up.
Do you believe in future?
Yeah, I think there's a future, and it's probably for everybody's benefit to believe in it. It's definitely easy to be pessimistic, but I think pessimism is like, if you look at pessimism as just being the opposite of, you know, overconfidence and hubris, it's like both are not the best idea. So I think to be overly pessimistic about the future is totally natural, but it's like a similar form of ignorance as is being overly confident that everything's just going to magically work itself out. And it's like somewhere in the middle is where everybody should be, kind of like, we don't know what's going to happen, but if we have like kind of like a wise form of hope, maybe we can steer the direction in something that's more benevolent versus letting everything destroy itself.
Suscríbete a nuestro podcast y escucha las entrevistas más relevantes de WARP en WARP Talks.